Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Richard Cruz, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Warrant Officer Class 1 Joanne Davey. We warmly welcome the family of Private Belford Wellington Earl, whose story will be told shortly. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by family and visitors to the memorial, and students on behalf of Shenton College, Shenton Park from Western Australia. If you're able, I invite you all to please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. Students, you may be seated. If there's anyone else that would like to be seated, please do so now. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's first World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Private Belford Wellington Earl, who was killed while fighting in France during the First World War. Belford Earl was born on the 1st of March 1893 near Narrabri, New South Wales, the eldest son of Edward and Sophia Earl. Known as Bill to his family and friends, he lived in Collarenebri, north of Walgett, attended the local public school, and then worked as a station hand on the local farms. Earl enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force on the 4th of August 1915, and after 3 months' training, embarked from Sydney aboard the troop ship Euripides for the war. He arrived in Egypt in February 1916 and eventually joined the 55th Australian Infantry Battalion. The 55th Battalion was formed in early 1916 during the doubling of the AIF, when experienced units recently returned from Gallipoli were mixed with new recruits from Australia. After another 4 months training in Egypt, Earl and the 55th Battalion sailed for France and the war on the Western Front. Their first posting was to the Somme region in northern France, where they arrived on the 12th of July 1916. 8 days after his arrival in the trenches, Earl was seriously wounded by a gunshot wound to his foot that saw him recovering in hospital for over a month. Earl sustained this injury fighting in the Battle of Fromelles. In this battle, Australian forces launched a major attack on a bulge in the German lines known as the Sugarloaf. The 5th Australian Division, of which Earl was part, was to attack the German lines from the north, supported by a similar attack by British forces to the south. British and Australian artillery units bombed the German lines for 7 hours, then at 6 p.m. commenced an attack across no man's land. Earl's 14th Brigade crossed the muddy and waterlogged ground and, combined with the 8th Brigade, successfully captured nearly 1 kilometre of German trenches. The brigade proceeded to hold their gain throughout the night, but due to extensive German artillery fire and counterattacks to their flanks, were eventually forced to withdraw. The 5th Australian Division suffered over 5,500 casualties in this engagement. The commander of Earl's battalion noted in his field diary that the battalion acquitted itself honourably in its first engagement, despite the fact that 80% of the men had no prior battle experience. They took 40 German prisoners of war, but lost over 300 casualties. Bill spent most of the winter of 1916 and 1917 in hospital, first with rheumatism and then with the mumps. Throughout this period, his battalion endured the hardships and drudgery of trench warfare. In the freezing winter conditions, they spent their time either manning the front line under intermittent German artillery and machine gun fire, or training and resting behind the front. In May 1917, just 2 months after his return to the front from hospital, Earl and the 55th Battalion took part in the Second Battle of Bullecourt, a renewed attempt to seize part of the series of fortified German trenches known as the Hindenburg Line. At 3:45 a.m. on the 3rd of May, Australian and British forces attacked the fortified village of Bullecourt. Despite initial success, they were not able to surround the German positions. This was the beginning of a battle that would steadily draw in more and more troops and last for over 2 weeks. The German counterattacks on the advanced Australian positions have been described as producing some of the most intense trench fighting of the war, and the engagement ultimately cost the Australian Imperial Force nearly 7,500 casualties. Earl and the 55th Battalion were used as reinforcements and entered the battle on the 9th of May. Throughout their first day of battle, they were continually bombarded by German high-explosive artillery and gas shells. At some point on the 9th, Earl suffered severe injuries to the left side of his body that fractured his pelvis and caused extensive wounds to his hips, face and arm. He was taken from the battlefield to the 3rd Australian Casualty Clearing Station and eventually to the 13th General Hospital behind the lines. When he arrived at the hospital on the 11th of May, he was described as being in a grave condition, and at 8:30 p.m. he succumbed to his injuries. He was 24 years old. His remains now lie in the Boulogne Eastern Cemetery in France, along with over 5,500 Commonwealth soldiers killed in the First World War. Belford Wellington Earl is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, amongst almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Belford Wellington Earl, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys and students, that completes this evening's last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.